Hello, everyone. So this is our second session for the Creators Track, post-hype and pre-product designing for adoption. So I think this is something we are all thinking about constantly for XR to basically go mainstream. So this is another fireside chat with two CEOs, Rebecca Barkin from Lamina One and Stephanie Riggs from Odeon Theatrical. And they will basically do a deep dive on all of the challenges stifling Web3, and then, of course, they will try to come up with strategies and solutions that will enable mainstream adoption for Web3. So give it up for Rebecca and Stephanie.
Hi. So yes, I'm Rebecca Barkin. I'm the CEO of Lamina One. And I will say it's been really nice to be back in the XR community. I spent about 5 years at Magic Leap driving content development and partnerships there, and at MSG Sphere developing large-scale immersive entertainment. And before I came to Lamina One, which we are focused on building a blockchain and protocol that enables immersive experiences in the open metaverse. So we're actually really excited to be here, and we're fortunate to have a few of our great partners here as well. One that we announced at this conference, Mira. And I have to say the first time that Neil Stevenson, my co-founder, and I did this particular demo with Mira, we were blown away by the fact that it was like really high fidelity. A lot of the dreams we had about VR and AR and city scale tourism and kind of mixed e-commerce and social and gamification, the level of fidelity we always wanted to see happen. When we saw this particular demo, we said, yes, that is exactly the type of content that we want to see in the world. We want to enable and benefit. It's all built on the blockchain. So if you guys don't mind, I'll play a quick video because we talk a lot about content. Today we're going to talk about design, but I first wanted to start with a little bit of content. So can we play the first one? So that one we're really excited about, and they're actually here today. Give them a little round of applause. And then we also announced another partnership with Introverse for the release of their Web3 game, Degens Royale, that'll be also on the Lamina One chain. And one of the things that's really exciting about this one, especially since this talk is about mainstream adoption and how you encourage it, and content was one of the ways that you do that. We were looking for things that got beyond sort of the economics and the Web3 sort of piece that has been a little bit of a letdown on the current sort of Web3 gaming side of things. So we were looking at things that really looked at broad and mainstream appeal, family-friendly, casual kind of things. And this Degens Royale was really impressive in that way because it actually leverages these 8 major football clubs, and you can take the mascots that we all love so much, and you can bring them into a game and be able to have gameplay with them, as well as have them represent as your NFT and PFP. So we can roll that one too, and then we're going to dive into design. Yeah, so it is super fun to be like with the XR community and see that blockchain is becoming a part of that conversation. So
What, we're not talking about AI?
Yeah, no, I mean, isn't that a relief? For like 5 seconds.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Riggs. I'm the CEO of Odeon Theatrical, which is a software development and content studio bringing augmented reality into live theatrical performances. But my background goes all the way back to Disney Imagineering through AR, VR, XR, location-based and experiential. And I think across all of these things, you know, and most of the people in this room have probably hit that post-hype, but pre-mass adoption stage. And one of the things we were chatting about setting up for this is like, how do you get to that mass adoption when you're pre-product? And design being that connective tissue that brings everything together. But one of the things we realize is design isn't necessarily usually in the room when we're talking. We're talking about content, we're talking about the technology, but the design is that invisible web that really drives mass adoption. So I'm curious when we're talking about like, okay, what are, like, when have we seen it go really wrong and really bad? And I think in AR and VR, that's probably the closest to my heart recently.
Yeah.
And seeing that, you know, getting invited to beta test when I'm getting predisposed to like, are you an enthusiast? Have you played this? Do you know this platform? You know, you're already predisposed to like the product.
Yeah.
Does that?
Yeah, I mean, there's some really great examples of this, and obviously I'm a huge believer in Magic Leap's technology, but I think that anytime that you start, you have an emerging technology, you have a lot of enthusiasts that gather around it, and it's largely engineering-led at the beginning, which is right, like because you're trying to figure out how to build the basic sort of infrastructure for it. But what happens sometimes is that we stay in this kind of bubble, right? And the engineering moves forward, but without necessarily design or a deep understanding of the customer who might use it, or what that problem set really is and what you need, the kind of refinement you need to make it really useful. And there were some great examples of this early at Magic Leap. So I for 4 years there led content, but then in the final year there, after we pivoted towards enterprise, led the redesign of the operating system for Magic Leap 2, which you guys should definitely check out while you're here. In that first iteration of Magic Leap 1, we were designing for, or I will say, like, the emphasis was on consumer, right? That was our target. And so we were so excited by what you could do with spatial computing. Like, we were so excited by the fact that you could totally change the paradigm, and you could really shift things up, and things could be placed spatially in the environment. You could have widgets that represent different applications, and they could live there sort of unobtrusively in your environment. But we forgot that when someone's logging into an experience, like, or they're putting on a headset, they probably just want to get where they're going also. So in the early days, if any of you had tried it, like, the boot up took quite a while. And there was, and you had this really great imagery, like, when you turned on the headset, but it took a little longer than you wanted. And then you were trying to figure out how to navigate that. What we figured out with ML2 was, like, what the customer needed was to get from point A to point B in a way where they were most familiar, right? So, like, the immersive experience was in the application side of things, or for an enterprise, it was about time to task. So they needed to get where they were going. And so that first screen really just needed to be stripped back. You needed to leverage, like, familiar paradigms to get people from here to there. And you didn't need the full spatial computing, the full mesh of the room to really help people do that. They weren't looking for that in their initial menus. So that's just sort of one example of, like, you push forward with a group of enthusiasts on the engineering front because you can.
Right.
And then you get to a point where you're like, wait a minute,
Right.
What does the customer actually need? They couldn't get out of it what we thought that they were going to want to get out of it right out the gate.
Right.
It's just too new.
Yeah, I mean, and the enthusiasts are who you're building with first, but it's a different thing to take it to a mass adoption to the end user. And I think,
Right.
you know, looking at design, looking at human-computer interaction design, the familiar constructs, as well as, you know, reducing the complexity of a task. You know, there's a great picture of, if you need to push a red button and you're in a big airplane cockpit, and there's 1,000 buttons, what are you going to push? But if there's one button, red, that is right there, you have no doubt that they are going to push that one red button. And that's a basic design principle that we tend to, when we're in the weeds of it, just move on. I mean.
Yeah, we had another good example was, we were chatting about this earlier with on the experience design side of things. So beyond like the menus and whatnot, when you actually get into content design, with Tonendi, which was an experience that I produced while I was at Magic Leap with a great small scrappy team of creative technologists. The band Sigur Rós we worked with to do this experience, and they were really specific at the outset that they didn't want to have any UI. And we were like, wait a minute, we don't have, this is a hand tracking experience, we don't have hand tracking working yet, and this is a totally new paradigm, and you don't want to have any tutorial or user interfaces that people recognize, like we're just supposed to get them through it, how? But it challenged us to do it in a way where the very first scene of Tonendi, we were like, if we could just get people, there's this like Lisa Zhu that is just basically a visual representation of a sound wave that's sort of vibrating in front of you. And we're like, if we could just get people to try to reach out and touch that thing, and then it zaps to your finger, then like we'll know that we did it. Like if we could just get people to just reach out and do it instinctively, then we'll know we did something right. Now there were some other issues in there, right? Because hand tracking wasn't perfect yet, and you need meaningful interaction really to resonate with people long term. But that first moment was like, if you could just tap into human instinct to reach out and touch it, then we will have done it. So I think things like that are really helpful.
Right, and being challenged to do that and not just sitting back into what's comfortable or what's already been developed, because it's going to change everything along the pipelines, internally, externally. Like when you're working internally, I was recently looking at like Fuse, which is a pipeline that's done by Framestore to incorporate Unreal into the VFX pipeline, and you look at a traditionally linear VFX pipeline where things are getting passed along that you can't go back from, suddenly being turned into a stacked where you can iterate multiple times as you're developing, which enhances the creative and improves the design process along the way. But I think like there's external, and even if you're not working in film, but you're working in large-scale immersive environments, it changes.
Yeah, we used to say like, creative application is like the greatest test of is it working? Because often that last 20% is like 100%. You have the feature delivered by engineering. Thank God they work wonders, but they deliver the feature, and it's often without the context or the nuance of how a human actually interacts with it, and like the level of quality that you want to feel out of it. And when you mentioned large scale immersive, so when I was at MSG Sphere, one of the really interesting things about working with creators there is like, if you guys aren't familiar with it, it's a phenomenal project. It's a massive $2.5 billion immersive venue that is opening on the Las Vegas Strip.
Big LED dome.
You can fit the Statue of Liberty inside of that building. It's that big. It seats 17,000. It's 160,000 square feet of 16K LED that wraps all the way around you, and it's spatial audio and haptics and 4D. I mean, all the tricks, right? But getting people to actually create for that venue in a way that really resonates, and dealing with like the challenges of large scale, meaningful interaction, is a real challenge there, and a novel one. So it's a little messy, like things typically are in early stages. But one of the things we noticed while we were developing there, working with directors, is like your peripheral, from an ergonomic standpoint, like you can't take in the whole screen at all times. So you can lean into spatial audio as a cue. Spatial audio is like half of the design of any great immersive experience, and if anyone tells you otherwise, they're wrong. But if you can use it to cue someone to look up and see something coming. But if 80% of the audience can't actually see that thing because it's out of their peripheral, then you start to have ergonomic challenges over the course of like a 45-minute immersive experience. So there's we had to look at that screen as mini screens that each had to have sort of levels of visual interest going on within your natural field of view, which is a change. It's a shift for creators as well, like not only for us, people that are going to experience it, but for creators who are designing for it, because most directors work within a 16:9, you know? So that spherical, which you, giving your work in VR and in theater, I would say like theater people actually made the transition to interactive like way better than traditional film directors often, but.
It's true. I think they work more spatially, you know, within an environment and redirecting within a space. But I've done some work with COSM, which is also a very large-scale dome LED, where you know, you're looking at putting live performances in it. I imagine it was the same at MSG Sphere, where you put the live performer there. You can't see them; they are tiny in that space. And so it's not just like the creators that are creating on the canvas, a new canvas, but it's like from the audience's perspective. It's like, how do they see that performer, which is the feature of why they're there. And I think both of those things go back to the guest experience.
Right.
And how the guest experiences it, and why it's so important to design for the guest. And I know what was important to both of us in talking about this talk was to, for those of you who are here, not just talk about why it's important, but also some of the struggles and the things that we've done in having to rearrange design pipelines with new products, whether it's location-based, whether it's AR, VR, whether it's Web3, which has its own unique challenges.
I mean, are any of you crypto users, blockchain people? Anybody?
I'm glad you guys are.
Oh, good. So familiar. Well, listen, wait a few minutes while we figure out the user experience there. But yeah, Web3 and crypto are pretty notorious at the moment. Right now, the threshold is pretty high. Also, you're dealing with people's money and their assets, right? And so you're talking about it in the context of wallet. You're dealing with people's digital identities. And right now, the onboarding experience is really painful, which a lot of great companies are working to resolve, but that's still pretty high. I'd say where we are where like AR was 5 years ago and where VR was maybe 8 years ago.
Oh, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It didn't change much between the 90s and the
It's 2000s. Still, whenever the tech stack is that fragmented, it's hard, and like standards are important, but like you said earlier, it's hard to establish standards when the technology is moving so fast. That it's like, you know, it's hard to stabilize. But yeah, one of the practical sort of things that we did, and again, this is an example from Magic Leap, but when Magic Leap transitioned from consumer to enterprise, you know, we went through a massive round of layoffs, and the design team was pretty decimated for a minute. And I had the task to rebuild it, and so we had about 13 people on the design team, and we had to ship, I think it was like 58 design specs to ship the operating system for ML2 within a few months' time if we were going to stay on track. And we're like, my God, how are we going to get this done? So what we did was, you know, design leadership partnered with software leadership and said, the way that we've done it to date is not going to work. Like, there's just, you can report the design team as late every single week if you want. It doesn't matter. Like, we can't get it done in that amount of time with this amount of team. So we're gonna have to fundamentally just tear down all the barriers and do it differently. And that's what we ended up doing. And we formed these little pods that were like, you know, someone from the technical implementation side, someone from the design side, someone from the product side. And we would do these really quick sprints to iterate against specific feature sets. And the engineers were also responsible for the heuristics that were attached to that feature delivering, which was like a fairly new thing. So it wasn't just this, you made this point earlier about pipeline. It wasn't just like check the box. You know, I delivered this feature, now I hand it off to design. Now design is going to implement it. They'll test it, then they'll come back to me, they'll tell me what's wrong. We really just did it together. It was like a fully integrated team that was equally responsible for the effectiveness of how that particular feature was implemented. And we also did it with brand, a total rebrand of Magic Leap in there as well. And so the brand principles and the brand values about the way that we wanted customers to feel and the way that we wanted the experience of interacting with Magic Leap to feel, that was also rolled in there. And so the result, I think, I mean, I just finally got to try it a couple of days ago, fully implemented. And my colleague, former colleague said to me, like, God, you're probably one of the only people that like is brought to tears navigating the settings, you know, because we just like, we had spent so much time making sure that like the tension felt right on the controller and the, you know, slider felt good versus a toggle. And so, so yeah, I think the truth is that engineering and design really own those goals together. Mm-hmm. And it's a real partnership, and thinking, sometimes you just have to break the whole system apart and just reinvent it.
I think that's valid. We're working in new formats, and sometimes that has to shift how we work. And you brought up two really important things, which are always part of what I'm working on when I'm integrating like location and live with any kind of new immersive technology. And one is the interdisciplinary teams, so that they can cross-pollinate the ideas, so that they can be in the room when decisions are being made and work that out together rather than passing it back and forth and causing problems for each other. And the second is that iterative process. It isn't a handing off. It isn't a traditional pipeline where everything is separated, but the faster you can iterate and even just gold spike it and have everybody in the room together, then the more you're going to be able to move together faster towards a better product and towards something that is more likely to have mass adoption, because in the end, like rule number one of HCI, human-computer interaction, is know thy user, for they are not you. So you can design to your content all you want, but when somebody else comes in there who isn't your enthusiast, who isn't your investor, who isn't somebody who's in your space, like that's when it gets real. And having them as part of that iterative process is critical.
Yeah, that
whoever shouted out, yes.
I think that one of the things that we wanted to get across too in the talk is that there's a number of different practical ways to implement design into your process, no matter what size you are as an organization. And I think like sometimes we get caught up in thinking that design is a luxury and like we're going to engineer really, really fast, and you just need to get the feature set out. You need to throw it out there, and then like then you can
make it pretty,
right? Then you'll make it pretty, right? Which like people in design really love. Like inheriting those problems and then having to like design to the flaw. But you had mentioned earlier when we were chatting, there are different sort of methods that you can apply, even with a super lean team, to make sure that and they're valid. They're totally valid. Like you had mentioned the 5.
Yes, with 5 users, you can find about 80% of usability problems. It's tried and true and tested, I promise.
Yeah, and then as you scale, like the methods change a little bit, but you can detect those really early problems with a small group, and then you can scale up as you go to make sure that you've got everything that you need, and you've got a wide enough base, and you're testing things like time to task and level of confidence and getting through something.
And I think it's important to know it's not just so that you can get to mass adoption so you can sell a product. It's a good business decision to involve the design process iteratively along the way. I think we probably both had experiences where we've tested technology where clearly a female had never been put into that technology, and you're going, wait a minute, we're 50% of the population, and we control how much of the majority of the household expenditures, right? So,
I mean, I've had some really embarrassing moments. One was I was working for a company that that did purely positional tracking technology, like before VR and AR had shipped with any kind of tracking, and we had designed. I was like me and like 30 some engineers, like that was it, and. We had designed like a little handheld controller. You guys probably remember when like rings were being used for gesture and that sort of thing. So we had designed this like really sleek little like thumb-based ring that you could use, and it had a joystick on it. And we were testing it, and I had gone to New York, and I was sitting down, I'll never forget it, with Adi from The Verge, who's a big gamer. And I remember the test, like, it was like very clear that she had made the comment that we hadn't tested it, like her thumb wasn't comfortably able to reach the joystick. And I remember in that moment, like, feeling such a level of humility about the fact that, like, we hadn't tested it with any women, like, which was a huge mistake. And I was like, this will never happen to me again. But I think your point about making sure that diversity is a part of it is critical, because it's not only good business, it's downright irresponsible, like, to not test beyond your group of enthusiasts. So especially when it comes to product design, because you need as wide of a base as possible. And if you're deliberately, or not deliberately, but unintentionally excluding, entire groups and swaths of people in the way that you make hardware, it's real hard to reverse a hardware change, right? It's really hard to change a remote controller that you've already shipped that doesn't fit a female's hand. So yeah, those are really important lessons.
Well, Rebecca's amazing, and I know we wanted to have enough time to share a lot of these stories, and so there's not a Q&A afterwards, but we will meet outside the room if anybody has any questions on one-on-one, and if there's anything else you want.
Yeah, and thank you.
Thank you.
A pleasure to talk with you, for sure. Very accomplished as well.
Thank you.